Bring your attention to your experience as it is in this moment. We're going to do a guided resting and looking around the issue of acceptance, invitation, resistance. We hear a lot about allowing everything to be as it is. And most of us have a lot of trouble with that. There's often some resistance around it shouldn't be the way it is, or I don't like it being this way, or I can't handle this. And there's also the whole amount of effort that we put into things. Are we in alignment? When we're in alignment, what's that experience like? When we're putting a lot of effort into something, how could we maybe relax that effort a bit? And that leads us into relaxing the body. When we relax the body, what we really do is bring our attention to a certain part of the body. And when we notice that there is tightness or contraction there, we don't actually do relaxation, we allow relaxation. So, with that in mind, bring your attention to the top of the head. To the forehead and the eyebrows. Observe what happens by bringing your attention to the forehead, to the eyebrows from the center out to the sides. Notice if there's any tension or knitting of the brows, any kind of contraction or tight muscles. And notice that when we bring our attention to an area, that our automatic response to contraction is to allow it to release. It actually takes an effort, although it's often unconscious or habitual, but it takes an effort to have muscular contraction. When the eyebrows are knitted or when the forehead is tight, that's not our natural state. And then bringing your attention to the flow of the breath in the nostrils. Breathing is another area where we don't do breathing. Breathing happens, it's an autonomic process in our bodies. And we can also work with the breath in an intentional way. So we could be seeing that our breath has a certain pattern or rhythm. Often if there's fast or shallow breathing, there's some kind of anxiety or tension there. That could be habitual, or it could be something that's going on in the mind or the body right now or in our life. And for most of us, when we pay attention to the flow of the breath, we'll notice that the flow begins to slow down a bit and relax. And sometimes it takes a bit of effort in terms of intention to allow the breath to become more even and continuous. If we have habits that we've developed over time due to stress or some kind of tension, that the breath is a bit choppy or the breath is a bit tight, maybe we hold our breath at the end of the inhalation or the end of the exhalation, then we're going to notice that those patterns might be present. Notice the patterns of the breath. And notice what happens when you bring your attention to the breath. Patterns of tightness, of holding the breath, of jerkiness, those are all reflections of some kind of tension or contraction. Notice what happens when you put your attention on the breath without, at this point, any effort at all to change it. Just to notice. And then applying a light effort of attention, really, to having the breath be continuous and even. So as you finish your exhalation, just let your breath come right into the inhalation. As soon as you finish the inhalation, allow the breath to go right into the exhalation. So there's a turnaround in the breath, but there's not a long pause or a break. See if the inhale and the exhale are about the same length as well. And do this all with the least amount of effort. It's more of a noticing than a doing. And noticing as well what's happening in your forehead and your eyebrows. This flow of the breath in the nose and your attention on the breath. And with those words, you might be all of a sudden aware that the mind was actually wandering. You weren't really paying attention to the breath. Let's pay attention for a moment to the thoughts in the mind. Notice the location of where and how thought shows up. It's generally behind the forehead, in the middle of the head. And we hear thoughts, sometimes not exactly as words, but the thoughts kind of pop into our mind. Sometimes we have images as well. Often we have energy in response to a thought, and often we don't. The thought's just kind of flowing through. One thing that we learn about and don't always accept gracefully, but in the end have to accept, is that we don't really control our thoughts. As we're sitting here right now looking at thought, we can't control what thought's going to come in next. It's just going to come up. We might be able to predict that if we're looking at our thought stream that certain experiences may be there. We'll be noticing thought. We might be thinking, well, I don't have any thoughts, or I hope I don't have that kind of thought, or oh my gosh, look at that thought stream. But still, we really don't manage or control our thoughts before they arise. Thoughts are very much affected by what's going on in our lives and how we feel about it, what reaction we have. Our minds are also very associative. So if I mention the word ocean, beach, oak trees, fresh orange. The mind is going to bring forward, helpfully, trying to help, the mind will bring forward associations with those items. Those associations might come up as words and or pictures. We often see images or little video clips. And we can notice that our response to thoughts are either positive or negative or neutral. And there can be a lot of differences in intensity. And we'll often have a trigger with something into our memory banks, and a memory will come up. When I said the word lake, I had a little image of me being out at the lake as a kid. Just kind of flash through, and then other images come through as well. And those will be generated through our own personal experience and memories. Notice your eyebrows, your forehead, the flow of the breath. And what's happening in your thoughts, in your mind, and that we're observing this process. As we're working with these simple observances, we might notice that we can't really make the breath become even and smooth. We can release the tension that gets in the way of the breath naturally being even and smooth. And that's a long process at times. It's built up over our lifetime, this tension and contraction, these patterns and habits. And it can take a long period of noticing and allowing for those to really completely release. And yet it's immediate too when we turn our attention to the forehead and relax the eyebrows. We can notice an immediate relief as well. So coming back to the thought stream, we often will judge our resting depending on what kind of content is coming up and how much and how often. Is it positive, negative, neutral? And the purpose of resting is this nuanced kind of approach around intention and attention and acceptance. When we're resting with our attention on the thought stream, we might notice that we can't actually stop thought. Thought comes. It's a process that happens on its own, and we can, over time, purify the environment of the mind and of the thought. We can heal our associations that might trigger certain kinds of thought patterns. We can become very familiar with our patterns of a loop of anxiety or fear, for instance. And when we see that our mind is starting to get into that compulsiveness or that certain pattern of ruminating, we can notice it and not follow it along unconsciously. There are many ways that we can work with this. We can work with kindness and acceptance. We can work with judging ourselves as having that pattern, and then noticing the judging and seeing if we can apply that kindness and compassion at that point. Perception is a key element here as well. This is a whole process that we're observing, we're witnessing. When we're caught in a stream of thought, we're actually not witnessing anymore. We're just being carried away. One thought after another, the reactivity in our body. And then at some point we notice and we step back and we observe. Ah, look at that. My thoughts were in this way for a bit, and then this thought came in, this association came in. And I went from that thought to the next, and my shoulders started to tighten and my gut started to churn. And then I noticed that that was happening. And now I'm observing the effect of that in my body and nervous system. Part of what we observe might be frustration, anger, a feeling that it shouldn't be this way. That's natural as well. And again, to remind ourselves, so the effort in this instant comes from reminding ourselves. We remind ourselves that we're watching and observing a process that's happening. And we might have all kinds of tools or skills that we use to remind ourselves of that. It could be as simple as coming back to the forehead. It could be that when we find ourselves getting into a fear loop, that we relax our body and really focus on the breath. Remind ourselves that this is something that's coming up to be seen. It's a reactivity and association that's coming up. That it's not actually happening. If it's a memory of something disturbing, that thing isn't disturbing in the external world, it's disturbing in our thought stream in this moment in time. And when we have that perspective and that attention to it, we're able to see more clearly that this experience is coming up as thought and sensation, that we're observing it. And to turn our attention toward that part of us that is not affected or damaged or changed by what pops up into the thought stream. We might do that by noticing the space all around us, the space that our body is occupying, the space where thoughts are appearing, the space where the response to the thoughts are appearing. It could be a contraction in the shoulders, some kind of energy in your body somewhere. There might also be arising some wish or urge to make that be different than what it is. And that's something that we can also notice. For many people, there seems to be a deep knowing that something's wrong, that something needs to change, that something should be different. And we gather a lot of evidence for that, and it seems very reasonable. It doesn't feel like it's right or fair when someone has been abused, or when there's some kind of unfairness, or when we're dealing with some particular thing that causes suffering. It doesn't feel like that's right. One way that we can work with that is to notice when that's here, and to notice how it's coming up. There's words and images, sensation that's attached to that in the body, that Velcro effect. Human beings have a natural turning away from painful and turning towards pleasure. And we can also look at, is that applicable in this situation of life? We can notice we have responses of turning towards or turning away from, attraction or repulsion, aversion, resistance. And that response is fine. There's nothing wrong with a natural response. And as we look deeper, is it really applicable in terms of the situation itself? It might be very true that something doesn't feel like it's fair. So we're not arguing about the truth of something. And a response of frustration, anger, resistance, something like that, is also very natural when there's a situation where something is feeling like it's not fair, or that it shouldn't be here or shouldn't be happening. That's natural too. And underneath all of that, there's the situation itself. There's the situation, and there are our responses to the situation, our thoughts and emotions and sensations triggered by the situation. So if we let our responses to that just be as they are, and focus for a moment on the actual situation. Notice what's there. The mind might want to get involved. And we can certainly notice if thoughts come up. more in a noticing, not a following along with. When you bring to mind the situation, notice where in your body there seems to be an energetic component to that. If there is, focus your attention there. Noticing if you can allow the situation to be as it is. The situation, including all of your responses to the situation. And all of your reactions to your responses. And your forehead and your flow of breath. Notice if it's possible to sit with attention, with noticing. With this experience of getting to know ourselves, getting to know how our mind works, the associations that come up, the Velcro with the sensation in the body. Seeing if it's okay to allow the whole of our experience to be here, exactly as it is. All of what it is that's arising in this space. And open your eyes and notice that now the visual component has been added to your experience. And just like with other kinds of associations, there are associations that come up with visual images. It could be something as benign as, oh, I noticed that picture needs to be dusted, or we could add a little judgment onto that. What's the matter with me that I haven't done that? It's so interesting to observe what goes on inside. And then how we can focus back on the perspective and the relaxation of the forehead and of the flow of the breath and of the mind and all of what we also know to be true. And maintain some of this awareness as you get ready and move about for the rest of your day.